committee of the whole meeting can be long. They've got a lot of detail, and sometimes we look for fireworks. And I'm teasing when I say that because item 2.1 on your agenda was just that, fireworks. And what's that about?
Basically, fireworks is it's a good way to start off a meeting. And the nice thing about it, there wasn't a lot of fireworks. It was a good objective discussion around it. During COVID, fireworks were put on a pause, if you would. And then after, in the last year, there was a decision by council to have fireworks during New Year's Eve, and then we'd have a look at things when going forward. The issue of fireworks was brought forward by the director, Sharon Bristol, to the Committee of the Whole, looking for a decision, because if we are going to have fireworks, for example, at Canada Day this year, they have to start the procurement process. So we haven't finished our operational and capital budgets yet. So she was just wanting to get an idea of whether or not we want to go forward with that. There was a healthy discussion about the pros and cons of fireworks, and at the end there was a decision that we will hold fireworks on the upcoming Canada Day and New Year's.
Bang, bang, there you go. Speaking of Ms. Bristol for a moment as well, we talked last time about the question of developing further, as you call them, themed crosswalks. That would be crosswalks that are kind of fancy painted, maybe with logos and so on. And she brought that question back to council after being directed to do so at a previous meeting. So where are we at with the themed crosswalks?
Well, there was agreement. First of all, we didn't have a policy on that, and the town has had a pride side crosswalk between just across the street, right in front of Town Hall, and we made a decision close to last Remembrance Day to have a veterans theme sidewalk on the corner of Havelock Street and Victoria Street and Church Street and Victoria Street. So the decision was we should put a policy around that, because so that we're not coming back to the drawing board every couple months when someone say, "Hey, I want a crosswalk, I want a crosswalk." So what types of crosswalks would we support? And so there was a policy developed around that and presented to council, saying, we won't put a crosswalk up, for example, with hate or any kind of inappropriate messages or anything like that. And we made a decision the decision would be rendered at council, as you mentioned before, but the decision was to move it to council, and there was unanimous support to move it to council to have themed crosswalks with the veterans crosswalks, pride crosswalk, an indigenous crosswalk, and an African Nova Scotia themed crosswalk. And of course, it's more than just painting a crosswalk. We have to make sure that it's done with the proper type of paint, and there's not too much paint, because that creates unsafe conditions, slippery conditions for people that are walking and that type of thing. So basically, it was a policy framework around that, and that will come to council for a final decision next Monday.
And speaking of artistic and painting, you're also looking at doing decorative fire hydrants. Is that going forward?
That one's not going forward. There's some great ideas that people come up with and present, and then once you start unwrapping the idea, you start finding out, okay, we have some major safety issues that could be associated with that. And the chief did a pretty good job of explaining that, these are obviously operational fire hydrants for the safety of our citizens. And there's been cases where people have painted them in the past, where the threads have been painted and they haven't been able to operate them during a fire. There's the whole issue around, who approves what kind of design, kind of like the crosswalks, who approves what kind of design. But more importantly, who does the maintenance on those? So if I decide I want to paint a fire hydrant out in front of my house, what happens when I decide I want to maintain that, and then and it even we even get into the issues around special types of paint. So it wasn't a unanimous decision to move, but I think the vote was 4-2 to move it to council, not to move it to council. Yeah. So when in the committee of the whole, when we decide not to move it to council, it doesn't come back again. So at this point in time, there will not be any themed fire hydrants.
And as you made the point, at this point in time, you say it doesn't come back to council. You mean it doesn't come back to the next council for action, but it can, in fact, and sometimes does, come back to council through another meeting of the committee, maybe down the road a year or more, a new council or whatever. It's interesting you say that, and I knew that the question of safety became an issue on fire hydrants. And I remember some 20 years ago or so that I used to travel with some regularity through a tiny little village that had painted all its fire hydrants. And they put kind of like cartoon characters on them, using the outlet coming for the hose as a nose, perhaps, and on and on and on. And I can remember driving through there with the family, with young children, and every time you came upon one, and somebody, there's one, and would point in the direction, and everybody, including me driving the car, would go look quick to see what, and realize how many times I was taking my mind and my eyes off the road. And every time I've heard debate about painted fire departments ever since, that becomes the crunch issue. So I guess I should say, on behalf of those who wanted to paint the fire hydrants, that's a serious issue, and you've said no largely on that front, I would say.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yes.
But they were cute, though.
Oh no, they are, and that's the difficulty, that you find on council. People come up with fantastic ideas, okay, but then once you start unpackaging it and saying, okay, we look at everything through a financial lens, and that may not be a big issue on that particular one, but even the issue of the firemen are coming, they're working there, and they're not worried about chipping the paint. Okay, and I learned last night that when they're painting those fire hydrants, they have a special type of paint that is really chip resistant, but it still requires maintenance issues. Okay, and so how much more maintenance are we going to pile on to our public works crews? And they're I hate to use the word potholes, but they're hard at work on potholes, I can tell you that. and
yes,
so I think
you're talking about paint issues on the cars now.
Yeah. So, I think, in general, I think you would find that, most people want to make sure that we take care of our basics, and then if we can do the nice things, do them. But, the public works staff are hard pressed. They're working really, really hard to make sure that, like all the basics are taken care of. So when we can do the nice things, we try to do it. But in this particular case, we just felt there's a lot of other priorities right now.
Indeed. And speaking of priorities and bigger issues, one of the items on your agenda yesterday was the strategic action plan and a complete review of your bylaws and policies. Now, this is not small potatoes, and this is talked about yesterday. Will be an ongoing discussion for quite some time, would it not?
Yeah, actually, that actually commenced, and we're just making sure that everyone on council is on board, because as you're aware, there's only two members of council that returned, and so there was a presentation basically provided to council on the policy review, which actually started about 3 years ago, because when we looked at our everything from our municipal planning strategy, our land use bylaws, and a lot of the policies, they were seriously out of date. And so it started with the last council, and this council is very committed to continuing on and making sure that our policies are up to date. But let's face it, our chief main responsibility as councillors is oversight financially and by policy. So that's where we get into the weeds and making sure that we have
people are getting prepared for
very
what's going
strong
to be an extremely exciting series between the Amherst Oilers and the Truro Bearcats. And as you know, Bill,
that we can work
it goes
with.
back a long way.
It doesn't mean
Amherst
things
and
can't
Truro
change
loves to do
as
battle
times change.
with each
But
other.
we're bringing everything up to date right now.
But when you make a point there, it's a good point that things change when times change. And it's sad to say that a lot of governments, whether it be federal, provincial, or municipal, all over the world, in fact, are guilty quite often of having put policies in place and then they forget about them. And they're still there years and decades later sometimes and can come back to bite you. I mean, I think of one that's terribly funny. Apparently, there's a city in the southern United States that still has a policy on its books that says no woman is allowed to drive a car. You're telling us quite a story about the game. The team is walking in front of the car, all of which is absolutely true. It's an exciting brand of hockey. More people are getting interested. The chances of filling up the stadium are even better. But all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, you've got some new rules coming forward, and the rules beg a question. You can't take a backpack to the game. They seem to be picking on the companies that make portable coffee mugs. And that's the whole point. It's a living document. There's a story behind it's a reflection of what you need to control today, not what you needed to control any number of years ago.
You have a safe environment.
Yeah, especially when you find a policy that has an experience for all those plan and the vision is for 2020.
It's not a town council decision.
2022, 2025.
It's an operational
It is easier to look back, though, isn't it?
With the security services.
Speaking of looking back and at the same time looking ahead, Sports Hall of Fame is on your agenda.
When we say new rules, you never were allowed to bring alcohol into a public place.
That's kind of a fun one. We're going to have to basically isolate, what is the municipal
we want to just make
with
sure,
the Sports Hall of Fame.
And when I say we, I think the whole town
wants to be part of that.
Make sure that it's an enjoyable experience.
50-year-old Canada.
So these rules really are to kind of put a muzzle on a crowd that may easily get out of hand. And you and I both know that crowds of any kind can very easily and very quickly be manipulated into mobs. And I guess that's really what you're talking about.
How they make decisions.
Yeah, I was talking to someone a little earlier today, and I was saying, I remember back, and you
no different than any Hall of Fame.
Years ago, back in the day when we were playing.
Joe Smith should be on the Hall of Fame, and then I heard last night
attendance or rink rats,
Hall of Fame, but
I was
not
one of
in
them.
Nova Scotia.
We go along sweeping out the stands and clunk,
so
be full bottles.
There's the whole issue around what community organization
the culture of hockey has moved on the ice, and the culture is also
role
in
most municipalities.
So we just, like I say, I think it's important that we have a safe environment. We want to have the loudest, most boisterous.
So we're just trying to earn that out and see what interest there is in the area.
And
unfortunately,
making all the noise and giving that seventh player kind of advantage to our hockey team. That's what we really want to encourage.
But we don't
want to have a situation where there's any kind of violence
for a lot of individuals
or
that
people that are
extremely well.
Inebriated,
and it becomes a tourist destination as well.
There, and it's done. And
you
we have to make sure also that the liquor license that
people love, people in the sports world, they
love
maintained,
and that there's no breaches.
I was in Amherst,
but usually, as you know, usually laws are written or rules are made following some kind of an incident. And I was there. I used to get up in the broadcast booth right there just in the last couple of years. Did a few games of play-by-play and color commentary
those types
with Daryl.
Of things.
And
and
we didn't have incidents of any kind. And I'm just wondering, did this come about because something happened just to put into perspective, and we only have a minute.
From my understanding,
all kinds of other issues on the agenda: senior scooter safety, crosswalk safety, speeding in school zones, intersection safety. All of these things that get discussed time and time again. Is there something that jumps out from those that I just mentioned, or others that you talked about yesterday?
You could be having over
what's important is people raise different people will raise concerns
tickets
about
have gone on sale this morning, and they're selling
like crazy. Like and the traffic authority is
one of the biggest events that have been taking place.
Concerns have been raised, and the chief of police
recent years.
What they do is they'll organize a review, and
I think with some of the
cars,
not any one particular incident,
checking speed limits and
several
and all that
smaller
kind of thing.
incidents that there.
And then he'll come back and say,
the
I
security,
don't think
the
we need to
stadium,
change this,
the
or we do
police,
need to change that.
the Ramblers,
all four of
they
those,
just want to be proactive
the
in making
decision
sure
was to maintain
that,
status quo,
it's curtailed,
but
to have
like anything else,
possible.
keep a very, very keen
let's
eye.
hope it is
as,
indeed, and that's why
try
we wanted
grow
to
our
get the word out
population.
before tomorrow night's game, the opening
and
of the
we have
semifinal
more
series. And as you pointed out, the entire
going
division,
on.
the
The senior
14
state,
division,
scooter,
all made the playoffs. You talk about being a
issue,
competitive
was
division,
one,
and then
there's
you
a
also
senior
made
safety,
reference to a long-standing
person in
rivalry
the county,
between Amherst and
and
Truro.
we want
And
to
that's
work with that
Truro
person
coming
to make
into
sure
town
that we're
tomorrow
giving
night with, like you say, a few thousand people
advice
may
and
well be in
workshops, if not
attendance.
the people that
We want them
operate
to be
those types of scooters,
loud and clear,
because there's
but
been
not
some serious
unruly.
accidents with
And
a
so
couple of
that's
them.
the important part.
And,
Tell me a
and
little bit
sometimes
about what
people
you
that
know
are
about the
operating
hockey,
them are not
the
quite
current
sure
hockey, that
where
is.
they can operate them and
Who
where
you
they
putting your
can't
money
operate
on?
them. So
well,
it's
obviously,
a
I'm putting my money on the
proactive
Ramblers. I even did a
No,
Facebook
indeed. You're
post
kidding. I want to thank you once again.
I
Just
even
to
did
let
a
people know
Facebook
you're
post and
talking with
reminded
us
some
this
of the
morning
Truro Bearcats
because the
that I played
mayor, in
with
fact,
in the
is
1975
trying
Canada
desperately
Games
to have a
that maybe want to put
vacation.
wager.
First
I
time he
guess you're
tried,
not following
he
me
didn't
on
get out of
Facebook 'cause I haven't
Halifax,
had
and
any
he this time did get away, so you filled in this morning, and
of
that
course, that's
becomes
a
your
wager to go
function,
to a
frankly,
food
as
bank
the
or something like
deputy.
that.
You
But,
take over when the mayor is gone,
Truro's
and that's
deep.
why you're here today.
They
We're
have,
grateful
good
for it and look
goaltending.
forward to
In fact,
getting
they
another
picked up a
chance to talk
goaltender
with you
that
in the
I'm very
future.
familiar
That's
with
Hal
my work with
Davidson, the
Halifax
deputy
Blue
mayor
Jays
of the
Milner
town of
in
Amherst.
goal.